My prediction is that New Orleans Saints running back Alvin Kamara will miss somewhere between 2 to 6 games due to suspension from the NFL this 2023 season. Why? We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you everydayers never miss a daily episode. And as always, if you want to continue the conversation one-on-one with me, also take part in our exclusive film studies, Q&As, and insider information delivery directly to your phone, you can do so by heading over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints today. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media. You can find me as the senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the New Orleans Saints, Tuesdays on the Locked On NFL podcast, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, it's Friday, so we're going to play In Case You Missed It, get you all caught up with the biggest stories from around the New Orleans Saints this week. We're also going to take a look at the coverage breakdown for the New Orleans Saints from 2022. Where were they most successful? Where were they least successful? And what do we think that outlook will look like in 2023? As our part of our delayed midweek fundamental, we'll call it an end week fundamental this week. But first, I want to wrap up kind of our Alvin Kamara series of conversations ever since that legal battle for him has finally come to a conclusion. If you don't know all the details around the Alvin Kamara legal situation, don't worry, we're going to get to that later on. But what I want to look at now is, now that the legal side is done, how many games will Alvin Kamara miss in 2023 if the suspension from the NFL comes down this year? And I'll tell you right off the bat, my take, which is that I think Alvin Kamara will miss somewhere between 2 to 6 games. Now, if you're hearing me say that, and if you've heard me have this conversation before, we're just going to kind of get into the weeds of it a little bit more here in today's episode. But it's a change from what I had discussed previously before the legal situation had completely come to an end. And one of the biggest telltale factors for why that is the case is that the felony charge that Alvin Kamara was facing in Las Vegas has now been dropped to a misdemeanor charge. And it's not even a misdemeanor assault charge. It's just a misdemeanor, like, I forget the phrase for it, but it's almost like disturbing the peace in a way, which is kind of wild. And so when I think about it that way, the thing that I look at for the NFL is it kind of changes away from the language of the code of conduct policy, which we've been looking at over the course of the past, like, forever when it comes to this Alvin Kamara case, because a felony charge that is relative to a violent act is met for first offense with at least a 6-game suspension, no less than a 6-game suspension. So 6 games was previously the floor. Now it feels like it could possibly even be the ceiling. And so when I think about the possibility of where the suspension can range, understanding too that whatever the NFL decides, whenever they decide it, could be appealed by Alvin Kamara's team and Alvin Kamara and potentially even be reduced, that kind of puts me in a feeling now to where it's 2 to 6 games. The one complicating factor around all of it is, of course, there's video of the incident taking place, which could potentially spring the NFL into action in terms of, hey, everyone can see what happened here, so there's enough transparency that if we don't use, a larger suspension or kind of put the hammer down here, that we're going to look weak and blah, 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 right? The NFL isn't really worried about the optics that they create for themselves. They're more worried about the optics that their players create for them. See the gambling suspensions for an example of that. Meanwhile, they're, doing deals with gambling partners and putting sports books in their arenas and all these other things, but whatever, that's neither here nor there. And so I keep saying when I think about it, but the way that I look at the suspension for Alvin Kamara being a little bit heavily weighted, it's that video, but then it's also the fact that it happened during an NFL sanctioned event. It happened during the Pro Bowl, not literally during the Pro Bowl, but the reason Alvin Kamara was in Las Vegas was for the Pro Bowl. But the interesting thing is that the NFL or not the NFL, but like, I guess everybody really involved in this knew Alvin Kamara was going to play this Pro Bowl game. They let him go out there and play the Pro Bowl game. And then he was, taken into custody after. He was detained after the Pro Bowl game. So it was like, well, no, we'll let him go out there and, play in the Pro Bowl and do all that. And I promise you that wasn't to be nice to Alvin Kamara. That's kind of let's let him go out there and, get those ratings and make the NFL a little bit more money and all these other things. And then we'll take care of it after that. But let him play in the Pro Bowl first. Like, that's such an interesting decision to me. That is like, okay, like I get it. But if that's going to be the case, turning around and then suspending him for a lengthy amount of time and making a big statement suspension out of it feels a little hypocritical. But again, it is the NFL, who have never been shy about being hypocritical when they choose to be hypocritical. So it is going to be interesting to kind of see how all of this plays out. But I do think that this suspension goes from being at least 6 games. The range that I used to give in my estimation was 6 to 11 games, because I can't imagine Alvin Kamara for this incident being suspended for longer than Deshaun Watson was suspended. That would not make sense to me, because I don't think those two things are the same at all. And effectively, they both kind of came to the same conclusion of being settled out of court and a, not a not guilty situation, but a no contest situation, or a being dropped, the charges being dropped and things like that. And so I just don't see this being a situation to where you can now say, okay, yeah, Alvin Kamara is suspended for an entire season. That doesn't make any sense. And the good news for Alvin Kamara is that he avoids the jail time, which we've discussed before too, which is always good, or the potential for jail time. So I'm going to be really interested to see how this all works out. But that range of 6 to 11 just doesn't feel realistic to me anymore. 2 to 6 now all of a sudden feels realistic. And if it's a 6-game suspension, Alvin Kamara has the ability to appeal, and maybe that gets reduced to a 4-game suspension. You think about Ezekiel Elliott. That took an entire year of the independent investigation to happen before anything ever came of that decision. How long will it take? Will the NFL be able to, will the NFL make this decision within a few days? Will they make it within a few weeks? Will it take an entire season? We'll kind of have to see how this all plays out. Because it is interesting, right? I mean, you think about, and John Hendricks and I talked about this over at Saints News Network today. Is this the priority for the NFL, or is the Washington football team sale or Washington Commanders sale, as well as all of the other legal battles that are going on with the Washington Commanders, is that priority? Is the John Gruden situation, which is still ongoing, is that priority? There's so many of these different things that maybe end up delaying this Alvin Kamara piece of it all. So I'm very interested to see how this all works out. I wish I could give a timeline in terms of how long it will take before we get sort of the resolution of all this. I can't give that right now. My estimation, though, is that this should be settled before the season begins, and that the New Orleans Saints know how many games they're going to be without their star running back, if any at all, here in 2023 before the season begins, which puts them in an opportunity and an advantageous space of being able to lean on Jamal Williams, lean on Kendre Miller during the healthy portion of the early part of the season, as opposed to something setting in late. And I'll mention too, the other thing to keep in mind here is that the later in the season that this rolls along is the worse for the New Orleans Saints, because after week 9, the rest of their schedule is all NFC, which means every single game week 10 and on for the New Orleans Saints has playoff implications. It could impact their seeding. It could impact their ability to get to the playoffs. It impacts tiebreakers, all of those things. So for the Saints, they would definitely want to have this resolved before the season, have the suspension happen early in the season if it happens at all. I think that's the thing. So I'm saying 2 to 6 games for now, but we'll see what the NFL cooks up and comes up with before this is all said and done. All right. That'll put a button for the most part on our Alvin Kamara suspension talk for at least a little bit. Now let's turn our page to end of week fundamentals, since we didn't get to midweek stuff. How did the New Orleans Saints do in coverage on the back end in 2022 on the defensive side? What did they where did they excel? Where did they struggle? And how does it all look going into 2023? We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Our partners over at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy advice you're going to get every single week, all season long. So whether you're prepping for the draft or you're scouting the waiver wire, we're going to provide you the players that are a guaranteed fit for your fantasy roster. So with draft prep underway for this upcoming season, let's see who Vinny Iyer has selected as this week's eBay's guaranteed fit fantasy pick of the week. Hey, which running back scored the most combined touchdowns over the course of the past 2 seasons? Well, that would be electric Los Angeles Chargers running back Austin Ekeler, whose 38 scores since 2021 featured a receiving first role and makes him a guaranteed fit for your number 1 overall selection in your fantasy drafts, because Ekeler is going to see his usual high leverage work as a runner and remain a focal point in that Chargers passing game for Justin Herbert as well. Vinny Iyer of Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you bring home a fantasy football championship, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is all about players being the perfect fit. Same goes for your vehicle. So with eBay's guaranteed fit and over 122 million parts and accessories available for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays nice and smooth and healthy, whether you need air filters, brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shocks, struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it. And they're going to make sure that it's the right fit for your car, because eBay's guaranteed fit helps you understand exactly what your vehicle needs the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to those sweaty rides, even if your ride just needs a little bit of fixing up, because now you'll know that you're always set up for success from the get-go. With eBay's guaranteed fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just one click away. For parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check marks. Get the right price, or the right parts, the right fit, all at the right price over at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay's guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Big thank you to all the everydayers out there for making us your first listen of the day every day. We're going to dive into our midweek fundamentals, talk a little bit about coverages, but really we're not just teaching you kind of what the coverages are. We're looking at how the New Orleans Saints either excelled or struggled in each one of these coverages. If you want the spreadsheet version of this research, which is everything from all the coverage types to touchdowns surrendered, sacks that were gathered, interceptions that were gathered, completion percentage against, passer rating, if you want all that information, join subtext.com/LockedOnSaints. A whole bunch of my independent research is going to be going on there that gives you the real nitty gritty if you want some of these fun statistics and stuff, as well as my own takes. But to give you kind of the 30,000 foot view, if you want the in the weeds view, that's where you get it. But we're going to do the 30,000 foot view on today's episode. So let's define a couple of things here, because what we need to know about the New Orleans Saints is that they were incredible against the pass in 2022 across all of their coverages. They were top 5 in sacks. They were top 10 against the run, or against the run in terms of yards per drive. They did a lot of really good things in 2022 over on the coverage side in the pass game. So that's the big takeaway here. So let's talk about maybe some of the intricacies of that. So let's define a couple of terms real quick. Man coverage versus zone coverage, you probably know, but as a quick refresher, man on man is when you're looking at somebody and you say, okay, that person's my responsibility. Zone is that you're covering a certain area of the field. A specific area of the field will be your responsibility as a coverage player. There's 2 different major categories of coverages on the back end: middle of field closed, middle of field open. So think about cover 1 being middle of field closed, meaning that there is a safety in the middle of the field. The middle of the field is closed, right? Middle of field open would be when there's a split safety look, 2 safeties. Let's use cover 2 as an example. 1 safety takes one half of the field, 1 safety takes the other half of the field, but the middle of the field is open because bodily, right, and just in terms of relationship to the field, each of these safeties are on the other side. Cover 1, cover 3, middle of field closed defenses, cover 2, cover 4, the rare cover 6 and cover 9 in the NFL, or cover 6 in the NFL is going to be middle of field open. So really all that means is there a safety in the middle of the field? Is there not a safety in the middle of the field? That's your difference. Middle of field closed, yes. Middle of field open, no. Okay, now that we've defined those terms, let's take a look at how the Saints performed in each one of these categories. So I want to start off with zone coverage, because when it comes to zone coverage, and I'm not going to get into all of the numbers here. Again, if you want to see that, you know how to do it. But let's look at zone coverage, because when the Saints were in zone, they did extremely well. They actually got all 7 of their interceptions this year in zone coverage, 0 in man coverage. They also got 31 of their 48 sacks in zone coverage as well. So you saw them be hyper productive there. Now, they also played nearly 3 times. Is that fair to say? Let's say just under half. Let's say just under half, or just under twice the amount of snaps in zone coverage than they played in man coverage. So obviously these raw numbers are going to be weighted towards zone coverage because they simply, on a per play basis, played more zone than they played man. So that becomes a big part of it. Nonetheless, though, the Saints, who had some good opportunities when it comes to, or had few opportunities when it came to getting interceptions and things like that, they were able to get those takeaways in zone coverage. Now, this is a man coverage team. This is a defense that builds its sort of identity off of its ability to put its corners on islands and be able to allow them to go one-on-one with receivers and lock them up and all these other things. So seeing them be so successful in zone coverage is a good thing because it shows sort of the scheme versatility and their ability to find success whether they're playing man or zone. That's a good thing. That's what leads to you being what the New Orleans Saints were, which was number 2 against the pass in the NFL. Next up, middle of field close. Just an interesting note for you. Marcus Maye played a lot more of the percentage, a much higher percentage of his snaps as the free safety, as the sort of single high safety, played over 70% of his snaps as a single high safety than Tyrann Mathieu, who played just under half of his snaps as the free safety. If you listened to me before the season began, one of the things that we talked about was, if you're an everydayer, and have been for a while, one of the things that we talked about was the versatility that you get at the safety position by having Marcus Maye and Tyrann Mathieu. Tyrann Mathieu playing 50% of his snaps, or less than 50, just under 50% of his snaps as a single high safety, but also playing in the box and playing, in the slot, and even had 4% of snaps out at corner as well on the outside. You can sort of see that versatility there. Marcus Maye had a little bit more of a solidified role as the deep safety. And I think that's a good thing because he's a little bit more of your rangy guy, bigger body, all of those things that kind of allows you to go out there and fight for the football. But how successful were they? Here's a good one for you. Usually when we're talking about middle of field open snaps, so again, that's where maybe safeties are on either side of the field as opposed to one being in the middle of the field, are all about eliminating big plays. And the Saints didn't give up a ton of explosive plays, particularly in the passing game in 2023 or 2022, especially as the season rolled along. You think about the Bengals game, they were absolutely, there were some plays there that were like that. You think about the Seattle Seahawks game, obviously there were some explosive plays given up there, but as the season went along, the explosive plays went away, and therefore so did the scoring. I'll remind you, no more than 20 points surrendered in the last 8 games of the season. The New Orleans Saints, when they were using their middle of field open coverages, so safeties on either side of the field, the split safety looks is another way to call it, they allowed only 5.6 yards per play on average. That's really, really good, because if your idea here is that we're trying to take away the big plays with these split safety looks, absolutely they found a way to be able to do that. Oftentimes teams will swap to these cover 2 looks, these split safety looks, when they're literally focusing on getting, allowing the, or eliminating the big plays, challenging the opposing team to run the football. Go ahead, run the football all you want. We're taking away the big play. You can't beat us in the passing game. That's what a lot of defenses will do. Or if they're getting torched in the passing game, they'll usually switch to those split safety looks. And so we saw the New Orleans Saints kind of get ahead of that, and they performed extremely well there. And that's a good thing. And that projects well going into 2023. Where do they struggle a little bit? Well, I think that it really comes down to individual coverages. They allowed a 93 plus passer rating in cover 1 situations. That's where you had the single high safety. So those are situations maybe where you'd like to see them get a little bit better. So this is where a guy like Jordan Howden becomes really interesting in the future as being a guy that's super rangy, that can read the field well, is known to be a good single high safety during his time with the Golden Gophers, and also, of course, has the versatility to play there. So just something to keep an eye out on about how the Saints address their cover 1 looks, where they have man on the outside and then a single high safety over the middle, where will they just play fewer of those snaps, or is there something that they do to get better there? That's going to be a big part of what we're going to be watching here in 2023. Last thing that I'll mention is that they were really, really good against the pass in the red zone, and that's a great place to be. The Saints were one of the best teams against. They were top 5 in the NFL in terms of red zone coverage. and only allowed 50% of red zone possessions in 2022 to be converted into touchdowns. That's a really solid percentage. You think about some teams who are hovering around giving up like 70, 60 plus percent of touchdowns in the red zone. The Saints were on the opposite side of that spectrum at only 50%, top 5 in the NFL there. And a lot of that came down to their pass coverage where they were super, super, super stout. And that's what you want to see. So, the Saints did a wonderful job there. So where were they strong? They were very strong in those middle of field open situations. Where were they weakest? Cover 1 is kind of a spot you would like to see them make some good strides going forward. I think that will start to happen when you're not dealing with so many injuries in the secondary and you're not relying on your 3rd, 4th cornerback to be the outside corner, or your 2nd, 3rd slot guy, or your 3rd or 4th safety being your single high safety, right? Like you don't have to worry about those things when you're not dealing with injury. So I think that will come along, and I think that's your sort of outlook for 2023 is this team should be able to perform even better in 2023 as long as that secondary can stay healthy, because they performed this well with a lot of injuries along the secondary. And so that bodes well for them going into 2023. All right, family, coming up next, Marshon Lattimore seen as a top 10 cornerback across the NFL. Let's get you caught up on everything that we know about a big week for the New Orleans Saints. And in case you missed it, we got that coming up for you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by birddogs, the greatest clothing company in the world, in my experience and in my opinion. I own 3 pairs of their shorts, a pair of their joggers. I absolutely love them. Convenient zipper pockets for everything, so you can stow away stuff if you're going out for a run, all that. They've even got the stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and the leg, make sure you look good, nice and tight, all that. Looking snatched, all that good stuff. You can find all of it and more over at Bird Dogs. They are my favorites when it comes to all this. All the things that you love about Lululemon, but fit way better. Way, way, way better than regular shorts as well, which are made to be like stiff and restricting and all that. You ain't got to worry about that with Bird Dogs. Go and check them out today, birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL, or enter the promo code LockedOnNFL for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnNFL or promo code LockedOnNFL for that free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you that. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with our Friday In Case You Missed It segment, getting you caught up with everything you need to know from a big week for the New Orleans Saints. I wanted to lead off with this because it's list season, and I don't really do lists and stuff like that, but this one has been an interesting one. I do like the ESPN like top 10 players at each position list. I railed about the Cam Jordan ranking where he came as an honorable mention as an edge rusher, mentioning that, hey, maybe we should pay attention to defensive end, just like we kind of separate edge rusher and off-ball linebacker. Mario Davis was a number 6 off-ball linebacker. And today, or on Thursday, the cornerback list came out, and New Orleans Saints cornerback Marshon Lattimore was listed as the 7th cornerback on the list. Now, just to bear in mind, last year he was ranked as the number 2 cornerback going into 2022. I think that the ranking of 7 here in 2023 is fine. I think anywhere between like 5 to 7 makes a lot of sense for Marshon Lattimore, especially last year. He just missed a lot of games. And so now you're wondering, okay, is he going to be able to come back from that? And how is he going to be in 2023? I get why maybe you'd be a little bit more cautious about who is Marshon Lattimore going to be in 2023, trying to project after an injury-riddled season. Now, the injury that he suffered, a lacerated kidney, not a lot you can do about that, right? Like, that's not really about Marshon Lattimore. The guy was out there trying to make a play, fractured a rib or whatever and lacerated a kidney. I mean, what are you going to do? But I will say this. The guys that he ranked behind, so he was ranked at number 7. Marlon Humphrey of the Baltimore Ravens was at 6. Darius Slay at number 5 with the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm fine with that. Jair Alexander, Green Bay Packers at number 4. Totally fine with that. Here's where I kind of go. This is where I get my Cam Jordan on and I go, really? Jalen Ramsey of the Miami Dolphins. Jalen Ramsey, I don't know if y'all remember, but got cooked by Rashid Shaheed last year. Cooked. Not cooked. K-A-H-O-O-K-E-D. Cooked by Rashid Shaheed last year. And Rashid was not the only wide receiver to cook Jalen Ramsey last year. I think Jalen Ramsey has fallen off big time at 28 years old. Hopefully, and I don't think you will. I really, really don't think you will. You don't see that from Marshon Lattimore. I'm sitting here talking bad about a Jalen Ramsey who was 27 years old last year. Marshon Lattimore was going to be 27 years old this year, but I don't think you're going to see that type of a fall for Jalen Ramsey. He was number 1 last year, Jalen Ramsey was. And I would say that Marshon Lattimore was more effective in the games that he played than Jalen Ramsey was throughout the season last year. So that's my one caveat in terms of like kind of being okay with the ranking. If Jalen Ramsey was a little bit further down the list where I think he belongs, that raises Marshon Lattimore into 5-6 conversation where I think it's fine. Your top 2 guys, Sauce Gardner at 2. There's so much hype around the guy. He had a fantastic rookie season, similar to what happened with Marshon Lattimore his rookie year. He got a lot of love going into 2018. Same thing's going to happen for Sauce Gardner going into his sophomore year. And then number 1, I think rightfully, is Patrick Surtain of the Denver Broncos. The guy's just outstanding. So I get that there's a lot of love for the young guy in Sauce Gardner. I get that maybe the name recognition of Jalen Ramsey still excites the people over at ESPN and everything like that. But I do think that Jalen Ramsey should be below Marshon Lattimore. I think that that's fair to say. But a ranking of 5-6, that makes sense to me for Marshon Lattimore, who came in at number 7 on this list. I'm very curious. The quarterback list is going to come out soon. Is Derek Carr a top 10 quarterback in the NFL? He's definitely a top 5 quarterback in the NFC. I would say top 3 quarterback in the NFC without trying to project the success of young rookies that we've never seen play in the NFL before. So I'm really, really interested to see when this quarterback list comes out. And I'm curious to see if maybe like as there is so much excitement around Sauce Gardner his sophomore year, does the excitement around Chris Olave vault him to being a top 10 wide receiver once that list comes out? I will mention that tight end list came out as well. And on the tight end list, he wasn't a top 10 guy. He wasn't an honorable mention, but he did receive votes. New Orleans Saints tight end Juwan Johnson received votes for that list. So that's pretty cool to see. Juwan should have a huge year here in 2023. So I'm very excited to see what he turns in, especially with a guy like Foster Moreau opposite him and a guy that loves throwing the tight ends in Derek Carr throwing those passes. So very excited to see what Juwan does. All right, so let's take a look now at a couple of other things. In case you missed it, obviously, I wanted to mention this. Alvin Kamara's court cases are now done. We mentioned and sort of discussed the upcoming NFL suspension, which we have to wait for. But in terms of legal cases, let me just debrief you on all that real quick. He had a felony criminal case in Las Vegas, which was kind of lessened to a misdemeanor, to which he pled guilty. He's got 30 hours of I almost say customer service, community service that I'll have to do over the course of the next 30 days or 90 days, excuse me. He paid $500 in fines to the court, and then he paid $100,000 in medical bills, $100,000 plus in medical bills to the victim. And then the civil case that he had here in New Orleans, which was not a felony charge, but was a civil case. That was originally a civil suit of $10 million. That was settled outside of court to with undisclosed terms, confidential terms. So it's done. No more legal situation for Alvin Kamara. We are still awaiting the result and the sort of, what's the word that I'm looking for here? Resolution. There we go. Of the Marcus Maye legal case, which still stems back to a few years ago on his DUI arrest while he was a New York Jet. So we'll see how that goes later on this month. Actually, it's like July 28th or something like that is his trial date. And then finally, in case you missed it, the New Orleans Saints will not be on Hard Knocks, and that's good news for the New Orleans Saints. There's a couple of guys in the locker room that have already done it before. Derek Carr, the year they did the Raiders, Jamal Williams when they did the Lions recently. And so I think, you can see that like those guys talk about, it's not really that intrusive. It's all good. But I do think that it's like good for them not to have that distraction. The HBO crew instead will make their way up to the Northeast and they'll do the Aaron Rodgers, New York Jets thing. And they'll be over there while the New Orleans Saints are focused on getting ready for their season. I think that's good news. In case you missed it, I don't know if you checked it out yet, but the new Netflix special Quarterback is out and it's awesome. And one of the first episodes highlights Marcus Mariota, or the season will highlight Marcus Mariota. And the first episode highlighted the New Orleans Saints' huge comeback victory when everything was great for the New Orleans Saints in 2022. So if you haven't checked that out, it is a lot of fun. And you might hear a familiar Locked On host voice during the series. Not mine, but one that you know very well, who's on this show at least twice a season in our crossovers. So super cool there. And then finally, in case you missed it, the New Orleans Saints did release their training camp schedule. 7 practices are open to fans. The first one's being July, 28th, 29th, and 31st. The padded practices early on. And so you'll want to check that out. Season ticket holders can start getting their hands on tickets on the 17th. Waitlist folks on the 18th. And then on July 19th at 10 a.m., it's open to the general public. So you can go and check those out to reserve your tickets as well. All right, y'all. that's it. Another week down, which means another week closer to training camp. Can't wait. Appreciate you. Next week, we're going to be going through and previewing training camp, getting you ready for everything you need. Position battles that we want to catch up on. Who's going to be the standouts, who's going to be that training camp stud, all that. We're going to get to a whole bunch of that stuff into next week. As always, y'all, I appreciate you so much for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.